So as I mentioned earlier, we've begun the 3 weeks, the saddest time of the Jewish year, a time between the 17th of Tammuz and 9th of Av. The 17th Tammuz, which was this past Sunday, commemorates, among many other tragedies, this is when the Romans breached the walls. And now during these 3 weeks, it led to the destruction of the Second Temple thousands of years ago. According to tradition, not only was the Second Temple destroyed on 9th of Av, but so was the First Temple. And many other calamities throughout the Middle Ages, the expulsion from England in the 1200s, the Inquisition in Spain in the 1400s, other tragedies throughout the Middle Ages that happened during this time of year. If you look at your handout, different communities under laws and customs of the 3 weeks. Different communities have different customs of mourning during this period. You may have religious friends that won't shave or get haircuts during this time of year, or even listen to live music, go to weddings. In the Beth Yeshurun community, we don't do weddings during these 3 weeks. Or some people won't buy or wear new clothes. And the intensity of this mourning increases on Rosh Chodesh Av, which, as you heard a moment ago, is this Friday. And during those 9 days, some Jews won't even wear freshly laundered clothes. And meat and white are not consumed, except on Shabbat. This is a period of extreme sadness, grief, mourning for events that happened long ago. And so some may ask, why do we need to remember what happened so long ago? How does that affect me as a Jew today? Shouldn't we let go of what happened, move on, celebrate all the great blessings we have today in the Jewish world? So I wanted to share an excerpt from, I think, a very important article that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, may his memory be for a blessing, wrote many years ago, 18 years ago, entitled, "Remember the Past, but do not be held captive by it." He writes, Judaism is a religion of memory. As you know that, right? The verb zachor, which means remember, appears no fewer than 169 times in the Hebrew Bible. Remember that you were strangers in Egypt. Remember the days of old. Remember the seventh day to keep it holy. Memory, for us Jews, is a religious obligation, and particularly so during this time of year. Jews never forget tragedies, but 2,500 years is a long time to remember. And often I'm asked, using connection with the Holocaust, is it really right to remember? Should there be not a limit on grief? Are not most of the ethnic conflicts in the world started by memories of perceived injustices long ago? Would not the world be more peaceful if once in a while we forgot? My answer is both yes and no, for it depends on how we remember. Though the two are often confused, memory is different than history. History is someone else's story. It's about events that occurred long ago to someone else. Memory is my story. He writes at the top of the back side, it's about where I come from and of what narrative I am a part. History answers the question, what happened? Memory answers the question, who then am I? It's about identity and the connection between the generations. In the case of collective memory, it all depends on how we tell the story. We don't remember for the sake of revenge. We know this, right? Moses teaches us in the Torah, don't hate the Egyptians, for you were strangers in the land. To be free, you have to let go of hate. Remember the past, says Moshe, but don't be held captive by it. Turn it into a blessing, not a curse, a source of hope, not a humiliation. And to this day, the Holocaust survivors I know spend their time sharing their memories with young people, not for the sake of revenge, but its opposite, to teach tolerance and the value of life. Mindful of the lessons of Genesis, we too try to remember for the future and for life. But in today's fast-moving culture, perhaps we undervalue acts of remembering. Computer memories have grown while ours have become foreshortened. Our children no longer memorize chunks of poetry. Their knowledge of history is often all too vague. Our sense of space has expanded. Our sense of time has shrunk. And that can't be right. One of the greatest gifts we give to our children is the knowledge of where we have come from, the things for which we fought and why. None of the things we value, as Jews and as Americans, I would add. Freedom, human dignity, justice were achieved without a struggle. None could be sustained without conscious vigilance. A society without memory is like a journey without a map. It's all too easy to get lost. I, for one, cherish the richness of knowing that my life is a chapter in a book begun by my ancestors long ago, to which I will add my contribution before handing it on to my children. Life has meaning when it is part of a story, and the larger the story, the more imaginative our horizons grow. Besides, things remembered do not die. That's as close as to immortality on earth. I love what Rabbi Sachs wrote, and I think it's relevant for all of us, especially as American Jews. And I think we have in particular a struggle, a challenge with memory. As many of you know, I had the chance to be in Israel a few weeks ago. I was so excited. It was my first trip to Israel in 5.5 years. I couldn't wait to be back. Lisa and I were signed up to study at the Shalom Hartman Institute. We were going to see some old friends, travel a little bit. As you guys know that have been blessed to be in Israel, you can go thousands of times. I had the chance to live there for 2 years, and you still can't see everything. There's always something new to see. And of course, my second day there, I got COVID. Just my luck. I made it 2.5 years without getting it, and just my luck, I get it when I finally get to Israel. So after 5 days in the hotel room, it was an okay hotel room, which I know the hotel room very well now, I was ready to get out, to take a walk. And I was very lucky in Israel last month, unlike Houston right now. The weather was beautiful. 70s in the daytime, 60s at night. And it's just a chance to take a long walk. And all of us who've had the blessing of walking through Jerusalem know how incredible it is to walk through Jerusalem. From my hotel, the Inbal Hotel, which I know many of you stayed in the past, within just a few moments, I walked to the Old City, the history there, the origins of the temple period in our time, where it all really began. It's where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac up on Mount Moriah. The temples were later built. And then just a few minutes later, you walk into more modern-day Jerusalem, but first you cross what was the border between Israel and Jordan, the old borders before 1967. You see the markers, the battles for Jerusalem when we reunified the city, and it became the unified city of Jerusalem, our capital. And then just a few moments later, as I was walking, continuing my walk on the way to Mea Shearim and Machane Yehuda, the Shuk, I came across the home of Ben Yehuda. Not Ben Yehuda Street. You may have heard, I know you know Ben Yehuda Street, but some people don't know that Ben Yehuda, the reason why he's famous is he brought back the Hebrew language. Now, he brought it back, right? He had when Jews started coming back to the land of Israel a century ago, what were they going to speak? Yiddish, English, Ladino, Arabic, who knew? Right? So they needed a language, a modern day language. So Ben Yehuda brought back the biblical language of Hebrew, which wasn't spoken, and literally brought it back to life by commanding his children and his wife to only speak Hebrew. I'm sure his children weren't thrilled, but this is the way it does, and it worked. And to see that home, and in fact, I took a picture of it and sent it to my son. My son just had a quiz on Jewish history, and he had to learn who Ben Yehuda was. And I'm so excited to send that picture to my son. I'm not sure how excited my son was to get it, but I had to take a picture of it. But it's amazing, within 15, 20 minutes, you go from thousands of years ago to 67, to the home of Ben Yehuda. You can't help but feel part of the Jewish story when you walk through the streets of Jerusalem. You're living in the place of Jewish memory. Right? It's very easy to follow Rabbi Sachs' wisdom when you live or you travel or you spend time in Jerusalem or many places throughout Israel. But here's our challenge living in Houston. As proud American Jews, as proud Houstonians. How do we feel part of the Jewish story if we're not living in the place of Jewish memory? Right? How do we make it not just history? How do we make it our story? How do we make all of this history that you and I learn, that our children learn, how do we sit down at Seder and say, I too was a slave in the land of Egypt. God too brought me out from the land of Egypt. How do we say that at Seder if we're not living in the place of Jewish memory? How do we make it not just history, but our story, my children's story, my grandson's story, my granddaughter's story, if we're not living in the place of Jewish memory? Right? How do we create Jewish memories for us and our young? So that all we do and discuss isn't just history, but rather becomes memory for us and those who come after us. How do we connect ourselves to the eternal Jewish story? That's the great challenge of living in the diaspora. You and I choose to live here. I love Israel, and I hope to go back many times in the future, but I have no plans to move to Israel right now. I love Houston. I love America. But I know it's more challenging being a Jew in a place like the United States when you don't live in the Jewish place of memory. And that's the question I leave for you this Shabbat. How do we become part of that Jewish story living outside of the land of Israel?